White Richard Spitten and The Serpent of Anata, Book 1, Chapter 4, by Bertha. It was a hot summer day. Lady Ludroth was sitting at a wrought iron table under an umbrella, eating lunch in the garden. Titus panted heavily and was sprawled lazily next to her feet. Occasionally he flopped over to his large ceramic bowl and gulped down mouthfuls of warm water. Amon-Ra ambled majestically about, inspecting his vast kingdom. Birds flitted in and out of the hedges, but they didn't bother him. He refused to get his silver whiskers and paws dirty. He thought that toying with birds was for low-life alley cats, whereas he resided at the prestigious address of Moo Manor. Lady Ludroth's cool, thin white caftan loosely covered her long, wiry figure. She always kept herself well covered whilst sitting in the hot sun. Her pale skin had been seriously burnt once, and she had suffered heat stroke during a holiday in India. Edith tottered unsteadily towards the table with her wicker tray carrying iced tea and a tall glass. Lady Ludroth slipped her oval sunglasses down her long nose, peering over them. "Ah, Edith, dear, refreshments at last," she said loudly. "Oui, madame," said Edith precariously, resting the chinking glass jug and tray on the table. "Plenty of the ice, as madame requested." She mopped her wet brow. "It is a very hot day today." "Yes, dear. I don't want you cooking tonight. A light salad will be quite adequate. We'll finish off the smoked salmon." "That will not be possible, madame." Edith glared at Amon-Ra. "The cat ate it while I wasn't in the kitchen last night." "Oh, Amon-Ra," chuckled Lady Ludroth. "He has an expensive palate, just like his mummy. Oh, well, in that case, open a tin of red salmon, dear." Suddenly there came the thunderous roar of a powerful motorbike in the distance, drawing closer and closer. Edith looked baffled and peered up to the sky, searching for the sudden appearance of a black rain cloud. Titus languidly opened one of his heavy eyes, too tired to bound about and see off the noisy intruder. A hazy cloud of silvery grey smoke streamed towards Moo Manor, and so did the silhouette of a stocky rider sitting astride a pre-war Norton motorbike attached to an ancient sidecar. A broad, well-built woman with curly, spiralling red hair, clad in black leather and wearing a leather helmet and round goggles, waved her hand in the air. Statue-like and sitting happily in the sidecar was a black Scottish terrier. He, too, had on a pair of goggles, plus a tartan coat, and sat perfectly still, just like a human being enjoying the windy ride. Lady Ludroth sprang ecstatically from her chair, startling Titus. "Good grief, I don't believe it," she said. "If it isn't my wonderful sister Bertha." Bertha's classic motorbike ground to a steady halt. Dismounting the wide seat, she took off her helmet and dirty goggles. Her leather trousers squeaked when she walked. "Okay, Lucinda," she said in a strong Scottish accent. "What on earth are you doing, woman, burning yourself to a crisp in this confounded heat?" Lady Ludroth laughed heartily, encompassing her sister with a loving hug. "You must be boiling in those tight-fitting clothes, dear," she said. "I hope you've brought something cool for you to change into and not those baggy woolen jumpers you constantly wear in the Highlands." "I certainly have. I'm sorry I didn't give you any notice of my visit, but it was on the spur of the moment." "You know you're always welcome. No invitation is necessary. It's wonderful to see you. What exactly brought you down here, dear?" "It wasn't one of your visions, was it?" Bertha had had premonitions ever since she was a child. They often came through her dreams and were uncannily meaningful and precise, shifting into reality on many occasions. "I certainly have," she said. "Now, my mouth feels like the bottom of a parrot's cage. Would you have a wee dram, Lucinda?" "Edith," shouted Lady Ludroth, "please fetch another glass for my dear sister." "Hello, Edith," said Bertha, patting Edith's shoulder. "You look remarkably well. Why don't you look... you don't look older than 60. It must be Lucinda's magic that's pickling your bones." I wouldn't mind a single mull if you have one. Edith smiled, shuffling off to the drinks cabinet. Bertha brightened up the place whenever she visited. Angus, here, boy, she called Bertha. Angus sprang out of the sidecar, trotted past Bertha, continued on to where Titus slept soundly and sniffed his floppy ears. Titus tossed his head and growled moodily, undeterred by Titus's enormous size. Angus playfully snapped and barked at him. Titus, rejoined Lady Ludroth, don't be so grumpy. Angus is our guest, so please be polite. At this point, Eamon Ra came to see what all the fuss was about, and was appalled to find Angus. His hackles shot up nervously, and he hissed. Angus mistakenly thought he wanted to play, and pounced on him, whereupon Eamon Ra let out a high-pitched meow and swiped Angus's nose. He then sprinted to the nearest tree, where he took refuge. Never mind, dear, he'll come down later for his supper. Now, tell me about this premonition of yours, said Lady Ludroth. I can't wait to hear. A meaningful expression swept over Bertha's white-circled eyes and sun-tanned face. Well, I dreamt I was walking through a forest, she said grimly. The wind was a-blowing and a-howling, and the trees were a-swaying. At that moment a blood-curdling, hissing sound came from out of the darkness. Something big slithered across the ground. It danced in the air and then wrapped itself around the length of my entire body. I couldn't breathe. It crushed my bones, taking the air out of my lungs. Are you sure you hadn't eaten cheese that night, dear? Asked Lady Ludroth, sitting on the very edge of the chair. Cheese has never agreed with your digestive system. I see its horrible face, Bertha continued darkly, disregarding Lady Ludroth's remark. Its eyes were jet black, like two pieces of coal. Its hissing tongue was long and venomous, a serpent without doubt, and then it was you. Thank you, dear, said Lady Ludroth, not at all pleased. She had been likened to a hissing serpent. No, Lucinda, I don't mean it was you. I mean I saw ye in the distance calling out my name. I awoke and I knew I had to come at once. Lady Ludroth was astounded. Bertha was speaking of the serpent of Anata. Like their grandfather Harold, Bertha was an archaeologist who had travelled the world in search of historical artefacts. Her old farmhouse held many ancient treasures, and she was an extremely knowledgeable Egyptologist. The British Museum had often called upon her skill and expertise. It became clear why Bertha had arrived so unexpectedly. Well, dear, said Lady Ludroth, you certainly haven't lost your gift. Your vivid premonitions is of great significance, and I do need your help. You know I didn't like to get involved with the witch stuff, Lucinda. I know I grow my herbs and they help my neighbours in their own way, but that's true natural magic. Bertha, like her sister, was a born witch, but preferred to lead a life without using magic spells. There'd been one exception, and that was when she was a girl. In a rotten temper, she had wished Annie Fairfax's hair to fall out after she had goaded Bertha and called her Carrot-head. The following day, Annie had arrived at school wearing a scarf. She was as bald as a snooker ball. Their mother had given Bertha a good telling off for wishing something so harsh upon poor Annie. But Bertha had not then been aware of the full strength of her magic powers. After supper that evening, Lady Ludroth brought Bertha up to date with all that had happened. How the boy had nearly drowned in Black Pond, and the mysterious stranger who had encouraged him to swim into the murky waters to search for the serpent of Anata. Angus lay fast asleep on his tartan cushion in front of the crackling fire. Every now and then Titus opened one eye to see his frisky young friend was up to no good. Eamon Ra was not in a very pleasant mood, having spent the entire hot afternoon stuck up a tree. For a strong cat, Eamon Ra had been a big wuss, thought Titus. Lady Ludroth sipped a glass of sherry while Bertha drank Scotch whisky. The wee boy was wasting his time, you know, Lucinda, and he'd have drowned for nothing, said Bertha. Whatever do you mean? Asked Lady Ludroth in surprise. Harold threw the serpent into Black Pond. Bertha sat forward and swigged her drink and whispered, That's what you presume. Harold wanted to put people off the scent. But I know the truth. Actually, he threw the large rock wrapped in a piece of cloth into the pond. Harold had his suspicions that someone had been closely following him and was watching his movements. 2 days before, a burglar had broken into the house and ransacked the place, and so he had pretended to dispose of the serpent. Harold was a canny man. She laughed, and her cheeks glowed from the intense heat of the fire matching her flaming red hair. Although it had been a hot day, Moon Manor grew strangely cold as night fell. Edith had insisted the manor was haunted and had seen ghosts on numerous occasions, especially during the month of October, on All Hallows Eve. Where on earth is it then? Asked Lady Ludroth. Search me. Its mysterious disappeared, and he never told a living soul of its whereabouts. Bertha's twinkling blue eyes looked heavy. She took a deep breath and yawned loudly. Sorry, pet. It was a long drive down here, and I feel exhausted. Of course you do, dear. Edith has organised your usual bedroom. Hope you find it comfortable. Oh, aye, that sounds good to me. I promise not to disturb ye in the morning, Lucinda. I know you like to stay in your bed till late. Bertha was an early bird and was usually washed and dressed by 6:30 each morning. I hardly call 8 o'clock late, dear, said Lady Ludroth. Besides, the night is still young and I need to telephone Lily Falcraft. We shall pay her a little visit tomorrow. Her granddaughter Isabel has great potential, you know. Lily Falcraft, said Bertha pensively. Why, it's been many a year since I clapped eyes on her. It'll be nice to meet Isabel, no doubt. A chip off the old block, she yawned. It's no good, pet. My four-posted bed is a-calling me. Bertha stood up and downed her last drop of whisky. I'll see ye in the morning, pet. Sleep tight and dinna let the bugs bite. Bertha retired to her bedroom, Angus faithfully trotting behind her. She walked up the creaky old wooden stairs. Angus barked at a suit of silver armour and bit at its heels. Oh, you silly boy, said Bertha. There's no need to be afraid. There's no one inside. The bedroom door creaked open. The eyes of the paintings on the bedroom walls looked as though they were watching her. I always feel as though I'm being monitored in this creepy house. She slipped into her brushed cotton nightdress and woolly socks and climbed into bed. Her heavy eyelids closed. Angus curled up at the bottom of the bed and drifted comfortably off to sleep. The aroma of burning tobacco wafted underneath Bertha's sensitive nose, and she woke with a jolt. At the bottom of the bed was a ghostly figure of a young man smoking a pipe. She rubbed her tired eyes, thinking she had imagined a semi-transparent apparition. He removed his pipe and grinned. Bertha sat bolt upright and propped herself up against the pillows. I must stop drinking that whisky, she thought. She squinted and then opened her eyes, but the figure was still there. Don't you recognise me, Bertha? He said. It's me, Harold, your dearly loved and late departed grandfather. He politely tipped his Panama hat and smiled. I'm pleased you have followed in my footsteps as a superb archaeologist. Bertha's mouth dropped wide open. I don't believe it, she said, astonished. And I see, like me, you enjoy a single malt whisky. Ah, he sighed. There are certain earthly pleasures that I miss. Angus suddenly woke with a start and automatically springing from the bed, sprinted towards Harold. Much to his canine surprise, he passed clean through the misty figure. Bemused and slightly shaken, he turned for another go at the intruder, but again fouled miserably. Harold laughed out loud. "You're a spirited young fellow, Angus, my boy. I could have done with you during my expeditions to Egypt." Angus soon grew tired of his feeble attempts, retreated back to the bed and sat on Bertha's lap. "I've never seen a ghost before," exclaimed Bertha. "I'm not exactly a ghost," explained Harold, "although there are a few poor lost souls in this old manor who are bound to the earth. Unfortunately, they jumped ship at the last moment, so to speak." "Jumped ship?" she asked. Harold shook his head. "I'm afraid I haven't got time to go into detail. It's very tiring visiting this heavy atmosphere. It takes so much of one's energy, so I must be quick. I've come here tonight purely to say that I want you and Lucinda to nip this quest for the Serpent of Anata in the bud. It is best for all concerned that it's left alone for a very, very good reason. You girls will stir up a hornet's nest if you continue delving too deeply into the past." Suddenly Harold began to fade. "Drat!" he cursed. "I hate it when this happens. I must return, I'm afraid." "Return?" said Bertha. "What do you mean? Why shouldn't we continue? Don't go just yet, grandfather." But Harold had vanished as quickly as he had inexplicably materialized.